Good afternoon and welcome to this special briefing with the Jerusalem Press Club. I am Jonathan Beck, Director of Content. With us today is Dr. Eyal Hulata, Senior International Fellow at the Foundation of Defense for Democracies, the FDD, and the first Foreign Visiting Fellow at FDD headquarters. Previously, from July 2021 to January 2023, Dr. Hulata served as Israel's National Security Advisor and head of Israel's NSC. Dr. Hulata served under Prime Ministers Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid. Good afternoon, Dr. Hulata.
Good afternoon, or good morning for me. I'm in the US. Happy to talk to you again.
Where do we begin? Let's start in the south and move to the north, to the northern border. So beginning with Rafah, with the recent IDF offensive in Rafah, which is still ongoing. Can you tell us about how this basically started in spite of the American, the no-no that they told Israel not to go ahead, and Israel went ahead nevertheless?
So I think it's important to be fair to both of the sides. The Americans have repeatedly said that they have never told the Israelis that they will not be allowed to go into Rafah. The Americans were, President Biden, Secretary Blinken, were worried that Israel will go into Rafah while there is so many civilian gathered in the city after they have been moved to there as safe zones, and potentially causing a lot of humanitarian damage. In reality, Israel, the IDF, never intended to go into Rafah with all of the civilians are in there. And I think in previous occasions, I said that there was a political element to this rift between the U.S. And Israel, I think more than substance. In reality, the Israelis have presented to the Americans their plans for the first limited assault on Rafah. The choice to focus on the Rafah crossing, I think, was a very good thing to do. It is very important to prevent the smuggling, the ongoing smuggling of arms, of money, of people into Gaza. This is the physical lifeline that Sinwar wants, and it was important to do this. And I think that the progress of evacuation of the civilians is going, I would expect, faster than the Americans have believed. There is still a lot more to do, and it will take more time. So it wouldn't come to a surprise to me that we will see increasing IDF penetration into Rafah, with the goal to reach the tunnels of the city of Rafah and maybe finding the seniors there, while coordination with the Americans. But in the same time, I think we'll always continue to hear political clashes between the administrations. This is, as I said before, political. I think it is also political in the US. I mean, I know that it's also political in the US, but it is definitely political in Israel. Unfortunately, it serves purposes of the extreme factions of the Israeli government. Well, in reality, I think the level of operational coordination is and could continue to be relatively high.
But since the operation began, I've actually seen, I think, 700 tunnel shafts, hundreds of terrorists killed, bodies of hostages retrieved from the tunnels. So tactically and strategically, this operation was indeed with merit. I mean, of course, there are the voices saying, even after Rafah, Hamas will not be defeated, but there is dismantling the last battalion does have, I think, also symbolic significance as well as strategic significance, no?
Yeah, so I agree. I mean, there is, I mean, I think the most important thing to understand about Rafah at this point is that is the last major city and operation that Israel can conduct. The balance, I think, is between that and the hostage deal that could allow the release of them. This is what potentially could have confronted in the decision making. But as Sinwar is in his stubbornness, refuses to release the hostages on a daily basis. I mean, I think at the moment there isn't even negotiations. I'm not sure that the mediators are as active as they were before. From this perspective, Israel doesn't have much military choices other than to go into Rafah. And as you say, there is. I think it's not only symbolic. I think it's the tunnel element is crucial. The prevention of future smuggling, the prevention of Hamas from the ability to restore its capabilities, to get in the equipment, the missiles, the weapons that it needs. If it is not able to do this, it will be very difficult for them to hold the grip of Gaza. That is, I think, a strategic objective, not only a military operational objective. As you said, of course, there is the battalions. We do have to remember that there are more Hamas armed people in the north of Gaza, in the places where the IDF has already moved out of, than those 4 battalions in Rafah. That is important, but not as significant. And the leadership. We've seen some media coverage or publications that Sinwar might be even in Khan Yunis, which means that he's not in Rafah. I'm sure that this hunt continues, but I want to emphasize the smuggling effort. If the Egyptians are not able to do this on themselves from the Egyptian side, and I think several of you have heard me say this before, I think this should have been the number one priority of the international community, to create conditions that could end the war through stopping of the smugglings. If the IDF needs to do this in Rafah, then so be it.
First of all, I want to get back to something you said, but I want to ask, my question is indeed now, is the Gaza Strip now an enclosed bath, as they say? Is it sealed off and basically everything that is fired at Israel is running out? But you said there's more Hamas people in the northern Gaza Strip now than in Rafah? Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, those are the IDF numbers. The spokesman have talked about this. This is why we see operational clashes. This is why the IDF had to go back into Jabalia and had to go back into Zaytun. And in due time, I would assume, because no one is working creatively on the alternative to running Gaza, Hamas is controlling all those areas. Hamas de facto is the from our perspective, the weak link. I think from his perspective, the strong link in the distribution of the humanitarian aid. Everything we see about the trucks being stopped and some of it definitely not getting to where it needs to be is because Hamas is controlling so many of the choke points in the entire strip. The IDF has not occupied Gaza in the full sense that we clear and then hold as the American doctrine in Iraq. This was not part of the strategy. The IDF is not trying to conquer Gaza and to rule it in a civilian manner, like in the times after the 6-day war and until we withdrew from Gaza in the disengagement. This is not the purpose of the war. This is a huge part of the conflict or of the discussion between Minister Gallant and Prime Minister Netanyahu last week, and also Gantz spoke about this. Who runs Gaza has a lot to do with what will happen in the end. As Hamas is using this vacuum and getting into it, and as I said before, it is quite clear there the Hamas presence and activity, combatant military terrorist activity in the northern part of Gaza is way stronger than what we would have wanted it to be.
But still, we're talking about the opportunistic cells, right? I mean, the military framework has been destroyed. No, I mean these are kind of
Jonathan, we need to
terrorists.
Yeah, we need to remember that we're talking about a terror organization in the first place. I mean, we called it battalions because it was convenient for us to conceptualize it this way. They always operated in distributed cells. This is a very decentralized organization, and individuals and in groups can cause a lot of damage because they do guerrilla warfare. They do not operate as battalions. They don't function as battalions, and the command and control doesn't resemble a conventional military battalion. So there is more emphasis on the sheer number than the organizational structure of their combating capacity. And this is why we will see counterinsurgency already happening, and it might grow as we move along, because as long as there are people with guns who understand where the enemy is, which is unfortunately the IDF soldiers, then they will find the ways to get there. And as we can see, they're effective in that. What we will see, I think, is continuous raids, like we've seen in the Shifa hospital, if you all recall a few weeks ago. Hamas has retaken that as a center of command and control and of hiding for their terrorists. So the IDF came in, I think, very clearly and effectively. And I think we will see more and more of those kind of modus operandi by the IDF. When it's Jabalia, it's more difficult. We need more troops to retake Jabalia, but I think we will see the IDF coming in and out of those strongholds again until there is a stable condition, which unfortunately at the moment seems very distant.
I wanna use this question. First of all, you kind of answered the question from one of our reporters about how long this cat and mouse game will continue, but I want to use it to segue to the north. You said on Army radio, I think maybe three weeks ago or so, that Israel should basically set a deadline for the evacuees to return to their homes in the north, and after that, it should be, I suppose, a hard deadline for Hezbollah to pull back or else. Is this contingent on the situation in the south being different? Because what we see now is that for many months we saw no rockets and we thought we kind of finished their stock, but as the IDF moved into Rafah, they started firing at Sderot, Be'er again, so obviously they have still a large amount of weapons.
So first, it is clear that Hamas has not depleted completely all of its rockets. They know that this will take longer, and the reason they know it is because they refuse a ceasefire with a hostage deal. So Sinwar must prepare for that, and I don't know this for sure. You know, I'm not in Israel. I don't see intel. I'm not in the loop in that sense. But I would be worried that they continue to smuggle more arms from Sinai to replenish some of this, but of course it will be in limited numbers. But you are right that as long as the war in Gaza continues, it will be very difficult for Hezbollah to stop its hostilities on Israel. When I spoke about this a few weeks ago, and I've been saying this for a while now, you know, what would have expected the Israeli government, the war cabinet, the prime minister to have a holistic strategy on how we move ahead? How much longer will this continue? What is the objectives also by way of timeline? Because Israel is not only, of course, the major concern for the Israeli public is the lives of our soldiers who die there. In a balance, we still haven't got the hostages back, but we need to understand, as long as the war continues, we're suffering in the international arena, despite of the fact that I think it's sheer hypocrisy and that the ICC should have never have issued search interrogation warrants, arrest warrants against leaders of a democratic country. It's just impossible to comprehend that they did that. But let alone it does happen, and the situation here in the U.S. and campuses and also in Europe, this is continuing. Israel has to take that into consideration. So I was hoping that the Israeli government, the prime minister, will lead to a strategic, holistic framework of how are we going to have an end to this war, to this high intensity war in the south, and connect this to the north. By this, definitely. I mean, it is May at the moment. Middle of May right now. I'm talking about the 1st of September. I think it would have been a wonderful message of leadership to the people of Israel, to the international community, and also, yes, a threat to Hezbollah that on the 1st of September, we start a school year in the north. And until then, there are a lot of things that can be done. The Americans, the French, and others are trying to negotiate a deal with Hezbollah to move them northern of our border so that our communities can be safe. Okay, fine. This is the time you have, because there is a limit to how long Israel can wait. Of course, this has to do with the situation in Gaza. If there is no ceasefire in Gaza, it's very difficult to imagine then we can do this. But I think that even if we have a ceasefire with Gaza, but we haven't found a way to move Hezbollah from the border in the north, then we can deteriorate into a war after that as well. And I think Israel needs to start putting a stronger line, a stronger message to this. I'm not talking about deterrence because I didn't think we had it in the first place, and we definitely don't have it now, but we need to deliver a message and to stand the line on it.
The question is, does Israel have a credible threat? I mean, taking over the Gaza
Yes, it does.
with land forces is one thing, but the southern Lebanon border is a much wider swath of land. And
I'm not getting into operational plans. I know what the plans of the IDF were, and I know that they have been working them even more. The damage the IDF can inflict on Hezbollah, should they choose to violate such a thing. I'm not talking about a preemptive strike of Israel in there, but Hezbollah will continue to fire rockets after we have returned our citizens to their communities and told them that they need to stop this because this will deteriorate into a war. Of course, the IDF can inflict a lot of damage on Hezbollah. It can inflict a lot of damage into Lebanon. But understand my argument. I'm saying this because I want to stop a deterioration to a war. The way things are now, when I look at the last few weeks, at the amount of rockets that Hezbollah is firing, at their sophistication, they sent a drone with a couple of rockets, but they were able to come very close to a strategic Air Force base based on what I've seen on the media. This is becoming more and more tense. This can escalate into a war, even if we don't want it, on our side and Hezbollah, and we will need a mechanism to make sure that we can stop this more stably. And I think that messaging by Israel and meaning it could serve that purpose. Unfortunately, I'm not sure that the Israeli government is capable of that. I've heard Netanyahu say that nothing will happen if civilians will not go back to their communities for several months later. So I guess he has other plans to that. But this is what I think we should do.
Regarding the recent arrest warrants by the ICC, do you think they're going to impact the handling of the war, including maybe the morale of the troops, or maybe the conduct of the government, the war cabinet in regards to plans, or the chief of staff?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I think even if this will sound weird to the audience coming from around the world, I think the direct answer is no. I think that quite on the contrary, we see the entire Israeli establishment, all of our political leaders, all of them, stand up and saying that this is outrageous, because it is. And the IDF will be backed by this support, both from the political echelon and also from the public. It is outrageous that the ICC thinks that Israel leaders can be in the same list like Hamas leaders over everything that's happened in October 7, regardless of the criticism that they may have on how we conduct the war. There have been publication on this. There have been engagement between Israel and the office of the prosecutor to pass him responses to all of his questions. Israel does have a legal system. There's just been last week another IDF announcement of handling soldiers that have conducted things that they shouldn't have in Gaza. I think that case was a soldier that was racking houses and civilian property. He was taken out of Gaza. So I think we see the seriousness in which this is taken. I think that accusing Israel in war crimes in Gaza is outrageous. I think it's absolutely wrong. I think it serves as a very immoral example of how the international institutions address Israel, but also their unwillingness to listen. The prosecutor was in Israel in the beginning of the war. I think he saw quite a lot of what Hamas has done. He didn't come to see Gaza afterwards, and to my understanding, he asked, and I think he would have gotten a positive response for it to come see in his own eyes. And regardless, he decided to go out and issue those arrest warrants. I think it's outrageous, and I think this cannot be backed. I expect all the international community to say that. All of the democratic leaders should know that if Israel goes first, this won't end just with Israel. I think we've heard a strong message by President Biden. I think the Germans have delivered such a message. Unfortunately, I've heard other things from France, for instance, and I think I don't want to name names on this. This cannot be the way that this is dealt. The ICC was created to judge leaders conducting genocides. We know that because we were at the center of the Jewish history, was at the center of that. This is so far away from what Israel is doing, regardless of criticism that one may have on the way this war is conducted. Let's debate that. Let's do this between our governments. I don't like the UN Security Council, but that is the table to have international debates. And the ICC, the Office of the Prosecutor, cannot serve as a political means the way it did. I think this is a very dreadful mistake by the ICC. Its impact on Israel, we'll have to see. I think, as I said before, the immediate impact, I think, will be very, very limited. What will be the more political, wider outcome of that? I do worry that this will serve our enemies who are fighting us, but also the people who do not support and are anti-Israeli and anti-Semitic all around the world. This will serve their narrative. I think that is very unfortunate, unnecessary, and unjustified.
Okay, but let's say moving on to Tachles. I mean, I know that Britain is a signatory to the Rome Statute and the US is not. Netanyahu is not, for political reasons, a very welcome guest at the White House or the US over the past month. But Gallant has been traveling to the US. Do you think, it's one thing like issuing statements and saying the court has no jurisdiction. Do you think Lloyd Austin is going to invite Gallant over and basically, show the world that he doesn't care about the Hague, or are they going to be more careful now, still tiptoeing around the issue of of diplomatic visits?
I expect them to continue to invite Gallant in the same way. And also, I want to say that let's not get ahead of ourselves. The prosecutor issued this request to the chamber, to the judicial chamber of the ICC. They have to put the ultimate decision. I have no illusions about their affiliation, but since everything is political, I think that there must be a very strong message to the chamber not to approve his request for arrest warrant, so we won't be in the situation that you described. Should we be there? Yes, of course. I mean, it will be a very dreadful precedent that an Israeli prime minister and minister of defense cannot travel easily to conduct their work. This will have, of course, implications, but I expect it also to have implications on the institution itself, and we'll have to see. I mean, I can speculate now how things will play out. I think what's important now is to have a very firm message by everybody that this isn't justified, so that this is prevented. It's not too late to stop this madness.
Okay, now moving back to the war in Gaza. Basically, the talk has been that so long as there is no plan for the day after, Hamas will not feel any kind of threat to its existence, on the one hand. On the other hand, as you said, being dismantled from the battalions and going back to like cells, its only purpose now is to disrupt any effort to allow such a thing to develop. And Netanyahu and the cabinet claim that no one is going to invest in Gaza so long as Hamas is there. How do we kind of get out of this conundrum eventually?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because I think this is the core of the problem in Gaza now. I will also add, if you may, I've stopped talking about this as the day after. This is the day of now. The lack of civilian governance in Gaza is corroding a lot of the phenomena that we described today and in other events. If Hamas controls the humanitarian aid, how should we expect it to reach the right people when Hamas clearly wants us to look very, very bad? So I'm not talking about the day after, I'm talking about the day now. I think the worst mistake that Netanyahu is doing, and unfortunately I think this is because he's even more than just affected. I think he's been hijacked by the extreme fringe of Israeli political right-wing factions that prevent him from doing what is so obvious, and that is the creation of civilian governance in Gaza. He's even said that himself in an interview to an American outlet a few weeks ago, but because he just says that and doesn't do it and doesn't coordinate it with the partners that we need to, then the United Arab Emirates Minister of Foreign Affairs lashes out and saying that they cannot be taken for granted and no one should expect them to come in without a plan. The Saudis also want to know how this will play out, on what is the future of Gaza, just to know what is the future of Gaza and the West Bank, so they would normalize with Israel, something Prime Minister Netanyahu has put as a very high priority, and it seems like he's incapable of doing this. But let's go back to Gaza, because it's the same kind of political issues that affect the here and now. Because of all that reasons, Netanyahu cannot start approving the process of creating the conditions on the ground that would allow other factions to do this. We've said he doesn't want Fatah to be there. He doesn't want the PA to be there. Well, there could be other pragmatic Palestinian forces that could do this. We can engage into what is this reformed PA, revitalized PA, whatever agreement that Netanyahu himself has talked with the Americans as an alternative to the PA to have something else. The Egyptians have to play a role in this. The Gulf has to play a role in this. I think they want to. They have just no intention of doing this with the existing government and the way that they create their conditions. But ultimately, I think this is the problem. If I would have, thought that it was important to prioritize one thing that will be on the table politically, diplomatically, between the international community and Israel, is about that. What should be the mechanism for civilian rule in Gaza? This is going to take longer. Israel is intended, because I think there is no other military option but to get into Rafah. We understand that we're going to be embedded in this for weeks and weeks. What's going to be the civilian mechanism to distribute the aid to all of the people that have been moving around from Gaza from place to place? What do we do so that Hamas does not take over those trucks and distribute it themselves? This is something that Israel needs to respond. Israel needs to have an appropriate plan for that. Unfortunately, it calls for political decision-making. All of you who've heard Gantz in his speech a week ago, this is exactly what he was talking about. Gallant the week before when he did that, that is exactly what he was talking about. And it seems like they cannot reach a constructive dialogue even amongst themselves. I think this is because of political reasons, unfortunately. This must be the demand from Netanyahu's government.
Okay, let me adopt like a kind of a hawkish perspective here and say, okay, let's suppose we do that. The IDF allows in PA forces. What's to prevent anything from 2007 repeating? I mean, I was on the graveyard shift at the Jerusalem Post at the time, and it was one night. They took over in one single night. They pushed them off the roofs, and that was it.
Right. Definitely.
So
And I do not propose that the IDF just gives it over to the PA. The PA has no capacity of doing this. I was talking about civilian management of the humanitarian aid, the day-to-day life. The IDF will need to secure that, of course. This is why this is so complicated. This is why we need to start talking about this and to create the conditions for that, because no one can do this other than the IDF unless some other force would be willing to come in, step in and do this. But over time, this can create conditions where the IDF can fade away. This cannot just be handing it over. There's no one to hand it to. When Abu Mazen sent a couple of people that report to Majid Farj into Gaza, Hamas killed them several months ago. So I have no illusions that this will just happen. And I also don't want the PA to come into Gaza. They're incapable of running it. I'm talking about civilian governance of the distribution of the humanitarian aid. If they don't do it, then the IDF will need to do it. And the IDF isn't not in a position nor in the manpower capacity to do this. This is going to be a lot of friction with the civilian Gazan community. This is what I'm talking about. I think this is what Gallant and Gantz were talking about. By no way am I suggesting that the IDF can give away the security responsibility of Gaza. There's no one to give it to, and I think this will be very risky for our own civilians. We need a hybrid. It's difficult. It's not easy to explain in 2 sentences. I think this is why the political narrative is so unfortunately easy to dismiss this, but this can be done.
Okay, thank you very much for this. I want to finish with a question from a reporter that builds on this about Hezbollah. Israel is not ready for an all-out war with Hezbollah. Now, this is according to this reporter because it's occupied in Gaza. If Israel will diminish its forces in Gaza for the construction of some kind of day-after apparatus to control it, it will still, as you said, need to stay militarily inside Gaza to some extent. Will that be at a scope that will prevent it from fighting on other fronts, or will it be able to have some kind of holding forces in Gaza and still go to an all-out war with Hezbollah?
So first of all, the amount of soldiers in Gaza at the moment is far less than it was in the beginning of the war. We've seen a huge decrease. We spoke about this over previous sessions. It is higher now because of Rafah, and it will go down again after we finish Rafah, because the IDF is actually not occupying Gaza. We haven't created a military martial law in Gaza, nor does the IDF intend to. I think you've heard Herzl Levy say that, and Gallant is saying exactly that. To do what I said, to go in and out to pockets of Hamas and to create conditions that allow the distribution of aid, I think it's something that the IDF can do. Of course, its presence in Gaza, but this is not occupying of Gaza, and nor is it an intent to occupy Gaza. There are factions in the Israeli coalition who want that, but I don't support that, and I don't think the Prime Minister Netanyahu is heading that way. We are very much heavily distributed in the West Bank. The IDF has many soldiers in the West Bank to keep it calm. That is an issue, and there are of course many soldiers in the north. But when we talk about the military operation in the north, first of all, I'm not advocating for it. I'm not asking for it. I'm not calling for it. I think this will be a mistake for Israel to go preemptively in Lebanon at the moment, not just because we're not equipped. This is not the circumstances to do something like this, and we need to create the proper conditions for that. But if Hezbollah will continue, and if Hezbollah will provoke something, and the IDF will need to do more, the IDF can do more. They can do more now. Of course, it's better to do it when we're better prepared. There will probably, I think definitely will have some kind of ground element to it, but I think and I hope it has to be very limited. close to the border. The IDF should not go into Lebanon and reconquer territory there. This should not be the aim of what the IDF does. Again, I'm not in a situation or position to advise war goals, but what would be my advice. It has to be decisive. It has to be focused on Hezbollah strongholds, and we will need to end it hopefully shortly after we start, because we're not looking to do to Lebanon what we did in Gaza. Very two different scenarios with two different goals and conditions.
Okay, and finally, a last question from a reporter. Have you seen, from the military performance of the IDF and Hamas, have you seen any successes or failures that you could speak about so far into the war?
Well, I think in generally, the major thing that I talk about in various occasions, I think we've seen the IDF operate on a ground scale for the first time in about a decade. And the last time they did it in Protective Edge in Tzuk Eitan, it was far more limited than what we're seeing now, and it didn't go so well. And I think that the fact that the IDF can perform this way is very meaningful. I think it's very important for the sense of security of the Israelis, but also for our enemies and adversaries to see. This is on a very high level, of course. On the more lower level and micro, of course there were mistakes, and I think there are many things that need to be investigated and seen. I think that the fact that it's so easy to shame the IDF for deliberately killing and targeting civilians, even though it's just fundamentally wrong. This is something that the IDF needs to look inside and to see how we manage this. Of course, there were mistakes like the World Central Kitchen that we talked about before. There are of course significant issues, but I think that they're sporadic and not the entire thing. By and large, I have to say that I'm quite content with the way that the IDF is conducting the war. Unfortunately, it is a very long war, way longer than I think we should have had. If there was one thing that I think the IDF knows this, and to my information, they've always put this in front of the decision makers. We're not prepared for long wars, and nor will we be. The fact that this has been going on for 7 months has a huge toll on Israel's economy. It has a huge toll also on the legitimacy of Israel in the world. These are external to the military. I think that it's also a heavy burden on the military itself to conduct such long wars, and this is something that we will need to address. This is why I said what I said before about Lebanon. We have to make sure that when we start a war in Lebanon, if we start a war in Lebanon, it will be short and decisive and not prolonged for such an excessive period of time. This is not proper for a country like Israel with a military like the IDF.
Okay, thank you very much for this clear and insightful briefing. Last question that just came in now. If you want, why did Israel did not accept the deal for releasing all the hostages, then take action against Hamas instead? Like when it could have had basically an all-for-all deal, which I think even Amos Yadlin spoke about as an option. Why didn't they choose to do so? Do you think this is political or something else?
So first of all, I thought we needed to go after an all-for-all deal a while ago. There was a premise in the question that there was such a deal to be had with Hamas. I'm not sure that Hamas was willing to go for an all-for-all deal. I mean, we've heard Israelis talk about it, but it doesn't mean that Hamas would have approved it. I think ultimately Sinwar understands that if all of the hostages are released, he's doomed. And it's clearly that he's using Israeli hostages, probably the male soldiers, as we can call them as bodyguards, of course, in parenthesis, because they're forced to be around him. They are his ultimate human shield. And I think Sinwar knows that, and I think this is a reason why he wouldn't go for an all-for-all deal. I thought for a long period of time that we needed to put the pressure on him to make sure that he understands the time is not on his side, to create conditions that would ultimately won't leave him with any other choice but to go for an all-for-all deal. If there was such a deal on the table, I definitely would have supported and think we should do it. There is also a political aspect. I'm not sure that Netanyahu can do this, that's a separate issue. But I think we need to also realize that the premise that it's just Israel that is delaying the hostage deal, I'm not sure it's right. With all of my criticism on Netanyahu and the way that he's handling the hostage negotiations, and I do, as you can hear, I think that unfortunately Hamas is playing to Netanyahu's hands in this regard. Sinwar is not willing to release them all, and I think this is the main reason why at the moment we don't see hostage deal negotiations.
I see. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you for this clear and concise briefing. And to our attendees, this will be available on YouTube later. I would like to thank also Ali Naor for producing this technically. Thank you, and goodbye. We'll see you next time.
Goodbye.